I'm Dr. Ben Newman. I'm a coronavirologist, and I'm probably a little late to the party on this one, but yeah, so this question was, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten who asked the question. It's on a different page behind here. We'll add that into the title. It was about this particular video, Canadian doctors speak out. Yeah, oh my goodness. I hate saying bad things about Canadians. Generally, the ones I've known have been really nice and really good scientists. So, but all right, Canadian doctors, you're gonna do this. Yeah, this is the price. All right, so let's go. This is the video, and right away you can see that it is, I believe, only I've only been able to find it on BitChute.com. That's probably the only reputable place you can go for news these days, right? Right? To BitChute. Yeah. Anyway, Canadian doctors are speaking out. Oh my gosh. Look who's speaking out most. It's this guy. This guy. All right, so he's going to use all his finest Canadian medical qualifications to, yeah, convince you that you should probably go out and get COVID-19, that you should just get it over and over again, I think, yeah. The idea seems to be that you don't need to worry about it or do anything to stop it. You just need to be free and live large and basically YOLO it, yeah, every day, yeah. So that's not normal doctor's advice, but that is this doctor's advice. So, all right, fine. We can go through some of the claims that come up and look at the actual data behind them, which all the claims that I heard, I made it about a third of the way through this before I was just too annoyed and they started repeating themselves. So if there's more groundbreaking claims at the end, you're not going to get them debunked here, that's for sure. But yeah, let's go. So, one of the first incorrect, demonstrably incorrect things that this particular goofball says is that the PCR test is next to useless. And that's a weird thing. So that's, I don't even know, it's just incorrect. It's actually the gold standard. It's a lot more sensitive than some of the other tests. And I think the reasoning behind this, he doesn't ever give reasoning. He's just trying to convince with, yeah, basically misinterpreted and badly worded, deceptive language. Yeah. So the idea is that only 3% of people who have PCR positive actually have the virus inside them. Now that's incorrect. And that is possibly coming from not having any clue what you're talking about. Common disease. So when you grow viruses in the lab, it is actually sometimes difficult to get a virus to grow. Even though you have the right cells, you have the right virus that's supposed to go on the cells, you put them together, but there will be times when the cells have stopped making enough of the receptor, and you need to go back and reclone a population that does a better job. There will be times when somebody mishandled the virus and you just, yeah, you can't get it to go, or there's way less than there ought to be that it says right there on the tube. So it's particularly difficult to isolate virus from clinical samples. And part of the reason is that clinical samples contain all of the stuff from a person that's there to kill off viruses. Yeah, that was not particularly hard to understand. So stuff like mucus, you'll get mucus that sticks all over the viruses, and that actually prevents them from being able to go in and start an infection. You get a lot of enzymes, protein-cutting enzymes, that'll just basically trim off all the spikes on the surface of a coronavirus, and you do that, it's not going to get in. There are a variety of ways that any virus gets abused in the body. And so it is a relatively small percentage of those viruses that are actually going to be things you can fish back out and put into cell culture and get to grow. Doesn't mean they're not there. The PCR test actually tells you that they are there. Because, yeah, it's looking for the literal genome of the virus, not any other part of the virus, the one central part that means you are definitely infected. So, yeah, we'll mark this one as debunked there. Imagine that stamp going across the screen, because I can't do editing like that. All right, fine. Second thing that he's all flustered about is that there are not enough deaths. And he shows you a deceptive graph from a long time ago with only parts of the data on there and only from Canada and whatever. So the idea is that here, let's switch over to our little tab. So this is, here we go, lovely Wikipedia data. And I forget, I don't remember if Wikipedia are taking the Hopkins data or taking the UK data, but they're both essentially independently calculated and show exactly the same thing. So we're looking at Canada, we're looking at it over time, and these are new cases. So they had one spike there, right when like the US had a big spike over Christmas, and they're in the midst of another big spike right now. Because, yeah, they have not been taking all the precautions that one should take to avoid big spikes like this. Now, let's look at deaths. So he's saying that there are no deaths and that they don't mirror the virus. And what we see there are deaths. And look at that. There's 2.5 peaks of deaths, just like there are 2.5 peaks of virus. And I think it's incredibly, not rude, it goes beyond that. Just awful. Because each one of these deaths, there is a family there that has lost somebody. And when you come out and just say that, oh, these people didn't die, there's nothing real here, this is all nonsense, that is just, yeah, that is really bad. Really, really bad. So, yes, there are deaths. You'll see a lot of deaths at the beginning because that's before we got good at doing testing. You'll see the same thing in the US. It means that the actual virus peak at that time was actually much bigger, maybe 5 to 10 times as big. It's just that we missed most of it because testing was bad. But the deaths are still there, and they kind of show you there's a pretty constant ratio of infected people to people who die from this thing. So there you go. Yeah. So there's number 2, and that's just nonsense. We can look at that one more time. Let's see. Here are cases. Boop. And so there's the kind of low peak is right there. And here are deaths. Boop. There we go. All right. So everything basically lines up, and that is nonsense. Yeah. So debunked. Boom. Second one goes across. All right. Crossing these off. Next one says that, yeah, deaths in children are statistically 0. And when you have to put a qualifier in front of 0, that means it is not 0. And once again, oh my goodness, these aren't just kids out on their own. They've got families, they've got loved ones, yeah, that have had to deal with the death of a child due to COVID-19. Why on earth would you, what, yeah, yeah. It seems like a terrible thing to do. I'll say that. Here are the stats from the CDC in America. The stats are going to be similar, but there are fewer people in Canada, so scale everything downward, but the percentage is roughly the same. So a total of under 18s, we've got 332. So it's not a high rate, but it's not 0 either, and each of these is a real person who had a real life and really died of COVID, and that is actually terrible. Yeah. And then you see that in the higher age groups, yeah, the death rate is much higher, really bad. So, yeah, that's is another completely incorrect thing that he's saying. The next thing that he says that is demonstrably false is that high doses of vitamin D are probably going to protect you. He says, well, they could just take vitamin D. Here we go. Here is the best study to date. So this is the effect of a single high dose of vitamin D. There have been others that have had low doses and haven't shown any effect. But on hospital stay for people with moderate to severe COVID, randomized clinical trials. They're actually either giving them vitamin D or giving them some placebo, something else. And what they find is that in their 240 hospitalized patients with moderate to severe COVID-19, it did not significantly reduce the hospital stay. So 7 days if they got vitamin D versus 7 days if they did not get vitamin D. And the hazard ratio, like what are the odds of one versus the other, are 1.07. 1.0 hazard ratio means there's absolutely no difference. And I think you're seeing a little tiny bit of statistical noise on top of that. There's a mechanism. There are good reasons why it would make sense that vitamin D might work, which is why you run tests like this. And when tests like this show that vitamin D does not work, then you move away from that and you go to something else, because there are still other things that are actively being tried and yeah, may have more just more legs, more ability to actually do something. So get rid of vitamin D. Next demonstrably false thing in there is that asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic spread doesn't exist. Where are all the cases coming from then, Mr. Smart Guy? Yeah, look in the Canadian Annals of Canadian Medicine and see what it says in there, because there's a lot of virus going around, and yeah. For example, here at Texas A&M, we are only testing people who are, at least in their own minds, asymptomatic. Anybody who's symptomatic goes to a different company and gets a test done there because, yeah, they want to make sure that they get those people the help that they need as fast as possible. We're doing more like a routine surveillance. We find lots of virus in people who are, yeah, asymptomatic or are convinced that they are asymptomatic. And we find cases where they have then, one person gets it and then it's been spread, yeah, by that person who was asymptomatic the whole time, according to themselves. It's just, yeah, yeah. And this is what's going on in the entire world. So they cite a couple of studies, well, they flash a picture of a couple of studies up there that have some flawed methodology. And then they don't look at any of the studies that actually show that this definitely does happen. And there are a lot more of those. So it's being very selective, cherry picking your papers and putting those blinkers on and pretending, la la la, none of these other things exist. Yeah. All right. And the last thing that I actually got to in this very annoying video is that they said that 30 to 50% of people have pre-existing immunity to it, SARS-CoV-2, based on previous infections from coronavirus. Now, this is partly true and completely misleading at the same time. So they're citing a couple of papers where very careful people looked, and you can find some parts of these viruses that are the same. And so you will make immune responses to every part of the virus, but some parts you'll respond to a lot more, like the spike. Yeah, we know the spike is quite different, so there's not a whole lot of crossover there. Yeah. But yeah, you can find in, yeah, the numbers are right. What they're saying though is that in these people you can find at least one white blood cell that is capable of recognizing something that is in common between an old coronavirus and this new one. And yeah, you can find that, but 1 or 2 or even 1% of an immune response is not an immune response. It's not enough to actually do anything. There are plenty of people that get the full-on vaccine and make really strong, really good immune responses, and a few of those still do get infected. Even the best vaccines are only a little over 90% effective in the short 3 to 4 month span before things presumably start eventually to wane. And so the way it's presented as if half of us would be fine anyway and don't need to worry about it, when the reality is that the virus is very unpredictable, or it's not necessarily unpredictable in that we couldn't predict it. If you were to take out every immune cell from a person and line them up and measure each one and look at what's going on inside of them and look at all the antibodies that they have at the beginning and look at the state, how many of which strain of virus came in there, we could probably get a pretty good estimation of exactly what would happen. It's just that there's no way to just look at a person or say, oh, you're about this tall, or this many pounds, and so this is what's going to happen. Oh, you smoke, then guaranteed death. Yeah. None of those are things. It's just that the things that make a difference are small and are on the inside and are difficult to measure. We don't have a good way to measure those and tell what's going to happen for sure beforehand. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a very misleading. Every part of this is misleading, and yeah, some of it is just outright lies. Other parts are being very selective with which parts of reports they're reading. Generally, if somebody like this was a PhD student and gave a talk like this, they would probably get thrown out of the PhD program for extreme incompetence, or else would just get sent back to like go do a bunch of reading and then come back when you know something, basically. So yeah, that's my takeaway from this particular thing. There isn't anything factual in the part of the video that I managed to gut it out and watch. So yeah, I would assume the rest of it is the same level of nonsense. I hope that was helpful in some way, and I hope that there's nobody that you know that actually buys any of this stuff. Yeah, because I don't, and most people don't, and I see several sites around the internet where people are going point by point and doing just what I'm doing and debunking this. I've tried to give my own little take on it, but yeah, it's all nonsense. Thanks very much. This has been Ask Dr. Ben.